apareceu desses selvagens e levasse do cama o partido. Apareceu desses selvagens e levasse do cama o partido.
Here in the United States, we've been so deeply engrossed in our own debates over whether men should be allowed to compete on girls' swim teams or whether it's immoral to carry our groceries in plastic bags that we have missed the fact that the government of China has been busy with its own agenda, taking over the world. In the space of just 15 years, for example, the Chinese have succeeded in recolonizing the entire continent of Africa. Didn't think that could happen? Well, it is happening. In Africa, China now calls the shots and takes the natural resources for itself, period. As of tonight, there is only one remaining African country that dares to recognize Taiwan, and it happens to be among the smallest countries in Africa, Swaziland. Everyone else on the continent obeys Beijing. But wait a second, how can this be happening? Isn't colonialism racist and bad? Yes, it is. And no one's worse and more racist than the Chinese. Go on Chinese social media sometime and see how they describe the Africans they've subjugated. It's horrifying. So why isn't the New York Times writing stories about any of this? You know why. Because the New York Times is on China's side. That's why they all but ignore the brutal Chinese colonization of Latin America, which is also in full swing right now. Colonialism violates everything the New York Times once claimed to believe in, but that's okay because they never really believed any of it anyway. It was always about power. We came to Brazil this week to see for ourselves what the Chinese are doing to Latin America. We're making a documentary about it for our Tucker Carlson original series. Brazil has the last pro-American government in Latin America. It's our single most important ally in the Western Hemisphere. Allowing Brazil to become a colony of China would be a significant blow to us and potentially a very serious military threat. The Biden administration appears to be in favor of it. One person who's emphatically not in favor of it is the president of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro. So, of course, the American media hate him. Here's some of their slander.
The United States isn't the only country lurching dangerously towards authoritarianism. It is happening all over, indeed. Just yesterday, for example, Brazilians elected Jair Bolsonaro.
Usually you don't get rid of an aspiring dictator through the electoral process. Brazil is going to have trouble with Bolsonaro.
It's that same authoritarian, like, women-hating, racist energy. He's the Trump of Brazil.
President Bolsonaro doesn't believe in social distancing, doesn't want lockdowns, much more extreme than President Trump.
Brazil's far-right nationalist president Jair Bolsonaro spoke at an event in Dallas. These two men and fellow travelers like Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin represent the growing global threat to the ideas of liberalism.
These are people whose research consists of 3 minutes on Wikipedia on the way to the studio. He's a racist! Of course he is. He, quote, doesn't want lockdowns. There's your proof. But it is the last clip from plagiarist Fareed Zakaria that explains why they're so mad at Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro, Fareed Zakaria tells us, represents a, quote, growing global threat to the ideas of liberalism. Liberalism, meaning neoliberalism, meaning globalism. And in fact, that is true. Bolsonaro is no Justin Trudeau. He's not a low-IQ fascist who'd be working as an Instagram influencer if he doesn't have his own army. He's not the president of Ukraine, who shuts down television stations that dare to criticize him and outlaws opposition parties and arms Nazis. In conventional terms, Bolsonaro is, in fact, liberal. He has done nothing to stop civil liberties in Brazil. But at the same time, he is a nationalist. He cares about his country. He resists China. Therefore, he must be stopped. George Soros hates him, and so does Joe Biden. He's not with the program. So naturally, we wanted to meet him. Yesterday, we did. We sat with Bolsonaro for more than an hour. And the first thing we learned is that the left in Brazil hates him very much. They tried to kill him when he first ran for president 4 years ago. With very little money and the backing of no party, he came out of nowhere to get 57 million votes. But he almost didn't survive to be elected. He was stabbed by a leftist almost to death at a rally, at which point the left funded lawyers to come in and rescue his attempted murderer. An amazing story that hasn't gotten a ton of coverage in the United States. He's an authoritarian, says MSNBC. All right. So we asked Bolsonaro about the stabbing in our conversation. We also asked him about his Christian faith, which is on display, something else that triggers them. We asked him about our Supreme Court's stance on abortion, his views on gun rights. And we asked him, fundamentally, why do you think you're so hated? Here's the first part of the conversation. The parallels between politics in Brazil and politics in the United States are striking to an American. You are opposed by a coalition of billionaires, college professors, and CNN. Tell us what the opposition wants. What will Brazil look like if your opponent wins, do you think?
A minha eleição foi quase milagre.
My election itself was almost a miracle. I had nothing going for me to be elected. I was just, say, an isolated member of Congress known as the lower segment of National Congress in Brazil. I conducted my campaign anchored on a biblical passage, John 3:32. Thou shalt know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. The media never gave me any visibility or space. Much to the contrary. They attacked me all the time throughout the campaign. On September the 6th, 2018, the eve of the election, I suffered an attempted assassination.
Far-right candidate Jair Bolsonaro was being carried through a crowd. You can see him there on the shoulders of some supporters when suddenly a man with a knife stabs him in the abdomen.
Doctors say my survival was a miracle, and the same is true for my election. And a very important factor, which you may perhaps not be aware of, is the fact that Brazil had a country that, upon taking office as president, the incumbent president surrenders strategic positions in the cabinet political parties, including the cabinet ministries, state banks, state companies. I did not do that. So I got a lot of pushback, strong pushback from Brazilian parliament, and we were able to withstand it. In 2019, in 2020, of course, the pandemic hit and everything changed. And this country was doomed to a fiasco because many governors actually gathered forces through the economy to defeat me. We were able to successfully come to the end of 2020, 2021, and came to a positive balance of about 3 million new job posts created in Brazil during the pandemic. And we're now in the last year of my current term in office, and the left wing is really going desperate, because despite everything, we're doing pretty well. Now, the problems in Brazil are the problems that are there for the whole world, such as, for example, inflation as a result of mistake, and policies adopted during the pandemic such as stay at home, and the economy will take care of itself later. The lockdown policies, as well as the war between Ukraine and Russia, which has partly, of course, affected the price of fuels, which in turn, of course, reflects in higher inflation levels. The left wing tries to use that to defeat me. If they do come back to power, in my view, they will never go back or go out of power again. Even former President Lula, everything he says, despite all the foolish things he says, and despite attacking so many people, such as Christians, for example, when it comes to the issues such as abortion policy and the apparent partnership he has with many crooks and thieves, he wants many crimes to no longer be crimes. And he wants to be able to lend money to dictatorships all around the world. He wants to disarm the good, willing population. They also want to revitalize the MST, the Landless People Movement, and arm them. They should have no less or no more than 10% of votes, but they do. The opinion polls conducted by Data Following, one of the last polls indicated that Lula is perceived as being more honest than I am. This kind of opinion poll, of course, is totally mistaken and doesn't work, but they do conduct these polls to attach some element of credibility to potential future manipulation of votes. That's a suspicion we clearly have. That's actually more than a suspicion. We have some circumstantial evidence, and if the left wing does come back to power, in my view, they'll never leave power anymore. And this country will follow the same pathways as Venezuela, Argentina, Chile, Colombia. Brazil will be one more wagon in that train. And the losers will be the Brazilian population, and also the left wing itself. The left-wing voter will lose as a result, and all of South America will be colored red, if you understand me. And in my view, the United States will become virtually an isolated country in the world.
So many questions, but back to the stabbing during your campaign. You were stabbed by a leftist at a campaign event. He was never sent to prison. He went to a mental hospital. did you think you were going to die?
Os médicos da cidade onde
The doctors in the city where I underwent the surgery, and also the following day in Sao Paulo, the capital, they said out of 100 people who were stabbed like I was, only one person survives. And thank God I survived.
graças a Deus,
And also due to my physical preparation, also because of the healthy lifestyle I had throughout my life. So that helped me resist.
durante ao longo desse tempo todo. Então isso me ajudou a resistir.
And as a coincidence on the eve, the day before I had taken a shot of benzidine, a drug that helped fight a more serious, or what would otherwise be a more serious infection because the knife was infected.
Já que a
And the
faca
person who stabbed me was affiliated with the left-wing party PSOL.
toda a facada é filiado ao
The
PSOL.
following day after the stabbing, 3 renowned lawyers came to the town Ruiz de Fora to try to defend the
No dia
person.
seguinte da facada, 3 advogados renomados
And the person who stabbed me, Adalia, on the same day, September the 6th, someone tried to go into the House of Representatives using false documentation,
alguém no mesmo dia
which could serve as an alibi if he had fled the crime scene in Juiz de Fora.
falsa, ou seja, seria álibi caso ele tivesse fugido
So someone tried to use his documents to go into the House of Representatives as an alibi.
na cidade de Juiz de
No one can possibly explain to me why the investigation has not evolved with so many elements available.
A investigação não chegou ao fim com tantos elementos para frente.
The media in Brazil is highly concentrated. 90% of all ad dollars go to a company called Globo, which dominates television here. They're opposed to you. How did you win? How could you win again with the entire Brazilian media against you?
Existe o peso da imprensa contra mim.
Yes, there is the weight of the media against me. True, but social media has been doing a great job in Brazil. My social media channels are among the most interactive in the world.
E eu acredito que hoje em dia
And I believe that today we have about 40% of the population who has not yet expressed their voting intentions, and most of the voters, we believe, will vote for me during the elections.
Why is there no Fox News in Brazil? CNN is here. You got over 50 million votes in the last election. CNN's a political player here, so is Globo, but there's no TV channel for your voters?
se eu pudesse fazer apelo
Well,
pra
if I
você,
could, launch an appeal to you, I can only say that you will be the most welcome in Brazil. You will be an excellent counterpart to the other vehicles or outlets. There are very few media outlets that are really unbiased in Brazil.
uma empresa,
That's something we need. And we do have one program in the Jovem Pan network called The Dots in the Eyes. The Dots in the Eyes, or The Dots on the Eyes, and they're excellent. They really showcase the good things going on in this country.
So you find yourself in a place where the permanent bureaucracy here in Brasilia, the state-owned companies, the media, leaders in countries around Brazil are all opposed to you. You stand effectively alone. Are you bothered by that, or how do you?
o Brasil é uma potência.
Brazil is an economic powerhouse in South America. The 10 countries with which we have political, geopolitical, physical borders are not that economically strong as compared to Brazil.
Nós somos o que
We are what you might describe as a cherry on the cake. If Brazil goes down or collapses, the whole of South America will go down and be colored red, if you understand me. And it will certainly, of course, be a country aligned with other ideologies outside of Brazil. And it will establish a wonderful bloc, wonderful between quotation marks, and they will be able to impose their will on the world. Brazil remains a democracy, but we do run a serious risk of collapsing.
It was the COVID pandemic that revealed who Bolsonaro really is. Bolsonaro did what our leaders refused to do during COVID. He thought for himself. He didn't let Tony Fauci or Klaus Schwab make decisions for Brazil. He did what he believed was in the best interest of his own country. He declared there'd be no national lockdown in Brazil during COVID. He refused to take the COVID shot himself, having already recovered from the virus. And he raised concerns about vaccinating children. A fascinating story. Bolsonaro explains why he did all this after the break. Bolsonaro is one of the very few world leaders, certainly the only leader of a big country in the West, who refused to destroy his own nation's economy in response to COVID. He also raised questions about the mandatory vaccination of children. Why are we doing this? He asked. Shut up, they said. Bolsonaro himself did not take the COVID shot. He'd already recovered from COVID and believed in natural immunity. Turned out to be a smart decision. We asked him about all these decisions during our conversation. Here it is. Why didn't you take the vaccine?
Olha só, quando apareceu o vírus,
when the virus actually hit strongly in March 2020, people began to seek out the vaccine, of course, against the virus. And I, too, of course, sought a medication because we began to see cases surfacing, started seeing the number of cases begin to go up. Now, someone who contracts the virus like I did, I mean, the vaccine doesn't really help. I mean, you don't take a vaccine if you have already been contaminated. The vaccine would be innocuous. You should rather take the medication. And in Brazil, of course, I studied the issue. I called other countries, including in sub-Saharan Africa, and Brazilian doctors and physicians, because there were people out there who either did not catch the virus, or when they did catch the virus was not strong enough to send them to the hospital or to kill them. And in Brazil, we saw the emergence of two medications that began to be used more widely. I myself took them when contaminated. But the global pressure all over the world from the media outlets, from the pharmaceutical companies, I mean, they were all against the early treatment. They actually focused on the vaccine. I read Pfizer's contract, and one of the clauses said, "We shall take no responsibility whatsoever for any side effect arising from the vaccine." I became concerned about that. And Congress in Brazil decided to vote and pass a piece of legislation saying that Pfizer or any other pharmaceutical company would not take responsibility for any side effect arising from the vaccine. We also had information, including from the US FDA, that several side effects are likely to emerge this year or next year in the foreseeable future. So, the concern, as mentioned by many doctors, was that people who were infected by the virus were already immune and did not have to take the vaccine. That was my case, and that's why I did not take the vaccine. But I did purchase vaccines for all Brazilians. I did not demand that people be vaccinated. I respected individual freedom. Each one was free to vaccinate or not. And I believe that about 20% of the Brazilian population decided not to take the vaccine. As I said before, maybe I was the only head of state in the world who did not accept restrictive measures or was against restrictive measures, and perhaps one of the few heads of state in the world who did not take the vaccine because I had already contracted the virus. The left was so worried about taking me out of office that they wanted me to take the vaccine, and I said, well, let me die. Just let me die then, and choose my policy. In South America, we are the one country that best addressed the issue involving the need for vaccines. And we very properly and adequately equipped our hospitals with equipment and medications. And I believe we have pretty much turned the page there. And based on the studies that we have available outside of Brazil, many deaths could have been avoided had there not been so much pressure on the part of the mainstream media against early treatment. Early last year, I sent a team to Israel, a team of Brazilian experts to Israel to look into the nasal spray solution that they had developed on an experimental basis. I was highly criticized, and we weren't able to make progress in that negotiation. Last month, a large Brazilian company published a news article indicating that nasal sprays are currently a very successful solution against COVID today. So you are technically allowed, of course, to take an experimental vaccine, which was the case in the past, but not the nasal spray?
I think you're the only world leader to admit not taking the vaccine, that's for sure. Why would Pfizer or any pharma company have liability protection against the side effects of their own drugs? Why would your Congress allow them to have that?
The population was appalled. They were desperate and afraid of the virus, especially the elderly population that also had some kind of disease or comorbidity, as a result of which Congress decided to pass a law to that effect. We regret it, really, because today, in hindsight, we see in studies, conducted outside of Brazil that perhaps 2/3 of deaths could have been avoided in Brazil and in the world. I mean, take sub-Saharan Africa. In sub-Saharan Africa, they take ivermectin to fight river blindness, as well as hydroxychloroquine to fight malaria. And because the number of deaths was very low, and the HDI was pretty low, one of the lowest in the world, The natural conclusion was that those medications could somehow also help fight the virus and the effects thereof. We regret the pressure that took place, and perhaps due to the economic power of pharmaceutical companies, they went on and invested in vaccines. And today you see, people who have taken the third, the fourth dose of the vaccine, and they still contract the virus and die. And we have a lot of, say, stranded vaccines in Brazil. In Brazil, a considerable portion of the population did not want to take the booster dose. I understand that to be their right. I support individual freedom. As I said before, we are sorry. We regret all the deaths. But I believe many deaths could have been avoided through early treatment. Much is said about lack of scientific evidence about those two medications for COVID. True. But they were useful for other things. Very often drugs or medications are discovered by chance. During World War II, for example, due to a lack of medication, soldiers were given coconut water in their vein, and they survived. As I said before, very often medications are discovered out of accident, or, sheer chance, including medications against or to treat sexual impotence, for example.
Viagra. Where do you think the COVID virus came from?
Well, allegedly from a laboratory on the other side of the world, but no deep investigation or no in-depth investigation has been conducted. It would seem that COVID has proved to be of interest for many people in the world. Many heads of state ended up imposing their will, and they felt the taste of dictatorship. In Brazil, state governance felt the taste of acting as dictators by mandating that people should stay at home and shutting down shops and not allowing people to go to school if they had not been vaccinated. So they felt that power in their hands. They could do everything during COVID. And more importantly, when it came to the public weal itself, many things could be purchased by governors and mayors. Although many of them, or the vast majority, are honest, they were nevertheless able to buy just about anything without much of a sense of responsibility. So that taste of not being accountable for your actions during COVID is something that flourished among many top officials in Brazil.
The left in Brazil, just like the left in the United States, is intent on disarming the civilian population. Makes them more obedient. But it doesn't make the country safer, and Bolsonaro proved that by loosening his country's gun laws and thereby lowering Brazil's murder rate by quite a bit. That's straight ahead. So here in Brazil, it is still a mostly pro-life country. It's still mostly a Christian country, but the left here would very much like to change that. Babies are the problem. We spoke to Bolsonaro about this. We also talked about his gun policies and how, provably, allowing civilians to protect themselves has reduced violent crime. Here it is. What are your opponent's views of Christianity?
Olha, a esquerda...
The left wing, the vast majority of them are atheists. They do not respect anything. They criticize priests and pastors, and Lula himself has said that he will, if elected, he will place priests and pastors and the military in their rightful place, or in the right place in society. For instance, when the U.S. Supreme Court recently changed its understanding and ruling on abortion, the left wing in Brazil did not like that. We did like the new stance taken by the U.S. Supreme Court because we defend life from its very conception. But not so among the left-wing people in Lula. Lula and the left wing, they often say that abortion is a matter of public health, and it is the woman that should decide. We believe that the life that has been given to a woman does not belong to the woman. And that is a stance espoused by our religion. The federal Supreme Court Chief Justice Barroso, who favors abortion, he himself stated that it is not the right time to discuss that issue yet. And in case he goes back to power, because there are 2 more positions to be appointed to the Supreme Court, he will certainly, if elected, he will appoint Chief Justices that will support the abortion policy. In Colombia, for example, abortion has been confirmed by the Supreme Court. In Brazil, the Supreme Court has interfered a great deal, not only in the legislative, but also in the judiciary, of course. Lula and the left wing believe that once they do come back to power, it would be irrelevant to count on those who are elected in Congress, because they will actually wield power over Parliament, and they will be able to legislate through the Supreme Court, just as they have legislated on issues such as homophobia and nepotism, which is, of course, the policy of employing members of your own family as a publicly appointed member of Congress. We lowered the tax called IPS, the tax on industrialized goods, and the Supreme Court said that was not correct. They changed it. Very often, the Supreme Court in Brazil, they make decisions that should otherwise be only decided by the executives, such as, for example, federal taxes.
The left in Brazil, Lula, seemed to be trying to introduce identity politics, American-style race, resentment-based politics into Brazil. Do you notice this, and is it working?
It is a way to divide and conquer. You know, even before Lula took office in 2003, the left wing would already preach that. I mean, the division of people along identity lines, such as blacks and whites, and employers and employees, and people from the northeastern Brazil, vis-a-vis southern Brazil. They have gained followers as a result of that approach. And the major divisionary split today is between employers and employees. Lots of followers, and they say that, hey, you're not doing well today because of your employer. And that divide approach or policy, the workers probably have always gained at least 1/4 of the Brazil population. They have always been supported by at least 1/4 of the Brazilian population. My father-in-law is known as Paulo Nigon, black man, and I am blue-eyed white man. Racism is there in Brazil, yes, but not as it is often described. Most of our main football players are, you know, people of African descent. No worries.
You've liberalized gun laws here. You've made it easier for civilians to own firearms. Why did you do that?
I was unable to actually change the Brazilian law, but by means of a presidential decree and also through ministerial orders, we interpreted the existing legislation as best as possible. And there has been a substantial increase in the number of people who legally own firearms in Brazil. And the consequences you see in the Brazilian media is a drop in the number of people who are killed by firearms in Brazil. We understand that once people get armed, you know, the crooks, the thieves, will think twice before they break into other people's property. If, of course, the number had gone up, I would be blamed. But just the opposite is going on today. And if reelected, if everything goes well, we will have a substantial support in Congress, and we will be able to pass laws on firearms very much along the same lines as in the U.S.
Chinese companies have been clear-cutting huge swaths of the Amazon rainforest for many years, but since Bolsonaro became president, Hollywood has awakened to this and blames him for it. Amazing. We asked him, what exactly is happening in the Amazon? That's next. Well, in recent years, the left's moral voices, that would be, of course, Madonna, Jennifer Lopez, Leonardo DiCaprio, people who couldn't find their way unaided to El Segundo, have discovered the Amazon rainforest, where it turns out fires sometimes break out. They say the Amazon rainforest is being destroyed, not by clear-cutting committed by China, no, criticizing China is racist, but because of Bolsonaro or something? Anyway, the earth is in the balance. We asked Bolsonaro about that. Is the Amazon being destroyed at the rate that we read that it is?
No, não é verdadeiro isso.
No, that is not true. 2/3 of the Brazilian territory are currently preserved and remain pristine, just as they were back in the 1500s, when this country was discovered by the Portuguese. The criminal acts that do happen, we will not deny that, are ultimately given too much visibility, because there is a huge interest in making our sovereignty over the Amazonian region a relative fact, or perceived in a relative light. I met with President Putin and thanked him because on 2 occasions when this issue was discussed with other countries, he stated that the Amazon region belongs to the Brazilian people, not to anyone else. The Amazon region is as vast as Eastern Europe. It's huge. It's wonderful. It's just not possible to, take care of every square meter in the Amazon region. There is illegal deforestation, yes. There are fire outbreaks, yes. But not at the rate that is announced out there. California itself always, catches fire, and it's not given that much visibility. French Guiana, likewise, you can't possibly set a rainforest afire, but there is illegal deforestation, yes. And we are working to tackle that. And how can we solve the issue? Well, it depends on the Brazilian parliament. It depends on land regularization. And we need the legislation to be passed to that effect. In the future, any heat focus directed by a satellite will point to the ultimate owner of that land. Where you seem to have a focus of fire or a fire outbreak beginning, you will be able to know whether it belongs to the federal administration or to a private owner or to the riverside people. Sometimes the riverside populations set fields afire for agricultural or cropping purposes, and that technology will certainly help us prevent any kind of deforestation. The Amazon region is as vast as Eastern Europe. It is not easy to take care of. The Yanomami Indigenous Reserve itself is as big as twice the territory of the state of Rio de Janeiro, which is a big state. So with technology, we will certainly be able to preserve the Amazonian region. We do not depend on international interests in preserving the Amazonian region. It is our own interests, and we, of course, want these preservation efforts to be somehow reciprocated by means of carbon credits.
You are opposed by most actors in Brazil and celebrities, models, TV presenters, and we learned recently that Mark Ruffalo also doesn't like you. You don't seem bothered at all by this. Why?
Well, if I do bother or become concerned about all of the criticism I get, I would not be able to work. Of course, no one likes to be criticized, but these are people who do not understand anything about Brazil. I think these people have never been to the Amazon region, and I would actually invite them to come to the Amazon region and overfly the region. And they will see an outstanding region. They will be able to overfly it. You will see no fire outbreak. You will not see the devastated areas. They talk about the Amazon region because it's trendy. It's a fad. In Europe, if someone says that the Amazon region is not being devastated, they are politically doomed to fiasco. So it's politically good for them. The criticism yields power, yields media visibility, yields votes, and that's what celebrities feed on. They're not at all familiar with the Amazon region. They are not at all knowledgeable about the region and the difficulty of investing in it. They just criticize it because it's a fad.
So you don't seem that bothered by Mark Ruffalo's dislike of you. Have you enjoyed being president of Brazil?
I must admit, I first launched myself as a candidate. Of course, I intended to become the president. But I was all too aware of the challenges and difficulties. And the experiences we have undergone, or I have undergone, I could never, ever have imagined what it would look like. But I am comforted by the fact that the other candidate, the Workers' Party candidate, Haddad, if he had won, Brazil would certainly be what Venezuela is today. So that's a source of comfort to me. And that encourages me to say to the population that God is the one who has placed me where I am today.
Mr. President, thank you for having us.
You're welcome. A message to the Americans: God, the homeland, family, and freedom. Thank you so much.